dann gefreundlich geschehen. A schenke neben die Gelegenheit, wenn der Mittagsnutzen, wenn der damals abnehmen von der Snarr. Wenn ich hier sehen habe, die Jeldes, immer Tabonen, immer Matoren, der werden die Berg zuertreten, der wird der Rabone, was ist, als einer soll werden zu jedem Zweiten, wenn man das trifft. Aber Adloschim, Adloschim war da, und erzählen sie wegen Hacklich, Bechola schon im Kulo, Allah, das kam in der Schnatzhacke, und Kolim, der Chagasukis, und dann noch der Chagasukis Atzmei, Bechulo, und erzählen, bis wann bei Ezim in der Leben, gleich mit der Maskonischen Bedeutung, also es meint mit der Meister Ruhe Iker, und es meint mit seinem Blibaris, und es meint mit seinem Gespräch, was der und hat mit der Amtag gekommen und gegeistert, wenn sei noch nicht gibt, und Zeile Aglich, und sei nicht anders, es sei Eigentum, als sonst in der Nebischer Messias, Genuske Beil, der alle Messias, weil zusammenlegen, wenn das werden der einige Reise Messias, von Mischias Zitkena, und wenn alles zusammen gefinnen, der Messias von David Malki Mischiche, die Yerushalayim, die Eretz HaKodesh, und die Yerushalayim Mir HaKodesh, und die Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, liegt durch Adne, Kennen und Yadecho, und dort brannen in Schnaß Tisma, des Gehachel, des Bashtus, weil Melech, Kennen und Bnei Bashtus Betelo, und mit der Simcha Gdele, weil Anfal Piva, damit ist der Kirche da, mit der Rika Gott der Linie, wie der Rambam rechnet, die Linie von denen, die hier der Kajese besetzt. Und das mit mir sagt, dass Recha schon der Gila Birode, und dann noch kommt das gleiche Reis, der Gol, Recha der Gila, bis die Hemmsche Verordnung von Samach zusammen, als wird als Simcha blieben, die der Gol Klau, und das noch mehr ein Mäßig in der Wenig und in der Gile, begon in Jan Meilen, und wie mit Tuba, wo ich hier als jeder, bis dann die Spanien, und dann in der Linie von Hakim.
have the honor to have with us Rabbi Yitzchak Raskin, the head shliach of Vermont, and the menal of Beis Chabad in Burlington. And Baruch Hashem, it's an honor to have him here. He came all the way from Vermont. It's over the border. It's just a posh. Verbringen with us. So please give your undivided attention and we'll start with Verbringen now. Dan gaan we erop. Chaim. Yantiv. As your next door neighbor, 90 miles away, for the last 39 years, I brought a little bit of hakos hatov to this community because for over 10 years, I would bring my children to learn here in the Meisdes, in Kotbimim and Besrivka. I would like to start with the story of the Didi Habarufda, something that I witnessed myself by the Rebbe. This is going back when I was a Bachel in Tafshin Mem Beis. Just came back from Shlichus. And my father, Olav Hashalom, called me from Morocco and he told me that the head of the joint distribution, Mr. Abramovich, that usually lives in Switzerland but is going to be visiting New York, and it'll be a good idea that I bring him to the Rebbe. Happens to be that Punkt, one of those days, was a Yechidus Klalis. It's already Tafshin Mem Aleph. It was a Yechidus Klalis. And I asked, and they said it'll be okay if I bring him with me. I picked him up in Manhattan. We came over, and after the Rebbe spoke, we went by the Rebbe. The Rebbe was giving dollars. And then I presented him to the Rebbe. And I said, this is Mr. Abramovich, who represents the joint distribution in Africa, and that includes Morocco. The Rebbe gave him $1, gave me $1, and when we started to go down the platform, the Rebbe calls him back. The Rebbe tells him, I owe you an apology. I'm standing right there. Because you had written to me, but I did not answer. The Linedo, through the Maskiras this week, I will answer. We go down, he turns to me and he says, I never wrote to the Rebbe. I tell him the Rebbe doesn't make mistakes. The Rebbe said he wrote, so he wrote. And we had this back and forth, and by the end he says to me, he says, you guys are brainwashed? Okay, let's talk about something else. We go down Kingston Avenue. Those that remember, there used to be payphones. So as we come to the corner of President and Kingston, he says he needs to call his wife in Switzerland. I went to the side to give him some privacy. He's talking to his wife, and all of a sudden, come over. He tells me his wife reminded him, because he told her the story, what just happened. His wife reminded him that 20 years ago, he wrote to the Rebbe. That's what I guess, he had forgotten. But the Rebbe didn't forget. Exactly the Rebbe's cheshbonos, the Rebbe had to see him, whatever, it took 20 years, that's not our thing. But I didn't want to turn to him and ask him, no, what about this brainwashing? So that's something that I like there. This is a story that you remember. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the Yontif today, Hey Tavis. I want to concentrate about the idea of having Gaguin to the Rebbe. When we have these feelings of yearning about the Rebbe. Because this is what it's all about. Hey Tavis as many different things that are happening. There's Sfarim, there's the court case and all the things. At first, I want to concentrate on what was seen on the Chassidim part. I remember getting the phone call, if I remember correct, it was my brother Hirschel that called me. He says, דידן Natzach. And I just went into the car and drove from Burlington to New York. Joined everyone there in the dancing, stayed there for almost a whole week, till I could say that I've almost sent us all back after the Sikha Yidris Davis. But that feeling that whoever was there, that feeling that we all felt bursting out when we witnessed the pain and the suffering that the Rebbe went through. And all of a sudden, there was a דידן Natzach. This was a burst out. And that, when you saw the Ave, the love of the Chassidim to the Rebbe. And that's something that, in a way, to relive that, and to be able to give that feeling to our children, to our grandchildren, that by itself is something very powerful. There's a Sikha from the Rebbe Vayigash Tinase, where he talks about Vayigash, and he says this week's parsha. And he says there's three matzavim, three situations in Vayigash. He says there's a situation, what Yehuda taught to himself then, that he's speaking to the viceroy, speaking to Yosef. And then there is, the Rebbe says, the second situation is, the second matzav is the real matzav, the matzav ha'amiti, that Yosef is Yosef HaTzadik. And that's who Yehuda is facing. And then there is the third matzav, Beruchnis Ha'inyanim, the whole idea of Smichas Gula Litfila, that Yosef is Geula and Tefillah is Yehuda, and the connection between the two of them. So in many situations, wherever we find ourselves, wherever we talk about Hey Tevis, there's so many different levels that you could talk about. Till the Hera B'Peil Mamish, that you need to go and buy a sefer. But when you look a little bit deeper, there's a situation, what the Rebbe spoke the months before and what went on. But then there's this point I'm trying to bring out is when the Gaguim, when all of a sudden this love to the Rebbe burst out in the open. And I was thinking a little bit, being a Bachel, a little bit earlier in September in the Lameds, there was a few times that feeling existed. And going back to Tafshin Lamed Ches, after the story of Shmini Atzeres, and when the Rebbe is in his room, and what went on the day of Shmini Atzeres, I remember like today, I was a young Bachel in Torah, and they told everyone to go home the night of Shmini Atzeres. But a few of us stayed, and I stayed. And I remember, like, there's something I won't forget. It was 5:30 in the morning, it was 6 o'clock in the morning, when all of a sudden, we didn't hear it clear, but there was this birching, the murmuring, something is going on, something is not okay. Later we found out that it was not such a good situation. And seeing some of the Bachim, the older Bachim, sitting with Zoktilim, Umiveint, and all this is contained for the next month. And then came Rosh Chodesh Kislev. I remember sitting in Olateira, we're in the kitchen around 7 o'clock, and then about 7:30 we got a phone call. The Rebbe is going home. And we ran like crazy. We ran to 770. And the Rebbe coming out, going home. And a few minutes later, after the Rebbe left, the simcha that burst out, it all came from these gaguim, this yearning, thinking about the Rebbe, and that special love to the Rebbe that it's hard to describe. A few years later, quite a few laters after Chav Zayin Adar Tavshin Nun Beis, and for months when we didn't see the Rebbe, and I remember when the phone call came that the Rebbe is coming out, or the Rebbe was coming out of the porch. That wanting to go, to figure out, and the waiting, is the Rebbe going to come out today? Is the Rebbe going to come out tomorrow? These hergeshim, and va'ayomim ha'ela niskalin b'naisim. And I remember going back to Tavshin Lamed Ches, Motzei Simchas Torah. I knew that I need to call my father in Morocco and tell him what happened. And I knew that's not going to be an easy phone call. I remember calling my father, and the first thing I told him, I started to tell him, Baruch Hashem, als is jetzt kuktuis beseder, aber, and before even I had a chance to say something, and you know, this is when we were just talking on the phone, he burst out crying that I never heard him crying this way. I have to tell you, I didn't even hear him crying that way when he found out his father passed away. That kind of, all of a sudden it hit me, and these are the kind of allegation that we, my siblings, we grew up in a house. That kind of a love to the Rebbe, that the Rebbe is, it's not just our father. This is it. And that kind of a love, in a way, when it comes a day like today, like Tevis, Vayomim ha'ela niskal b'naisim, this is what we have to kind of work on ourselves, and it's not easy, and how to remember those days, give it over to our children and to our grandchildren, and to talk about this idea of his kashrus, because that's what it is. Hanasi hu hakol, the Rebbe, this is everything for us. It reminds me of a very interesting story, because I asked my father about this. Today, Baruch Hashem, in Morocco, is almost peaceful times. Everyone travels to Morocco now. Mamish became a safe haven. Many Yidden, there's tours, trips all the time. I know from a lot of Yidden here in Montreal that they have traveled to Morocco. But in the early days, it wasn't so simple in Morocco. To walk by yourself in the streets as a Yid, with your yarmulke, with your tzitzis, many, many times we had our yarmulke grabbed or punched. I remember coming back, we came back from New York one time, it was a test maybe, and I was so excited because I saw in New York everyone is driving their bikes, there's nothing what to be afraid of. And in Casablanca, where we lived, you have to be very careful, especially in those times. So we had a long hallway in our house, and that's where you practice biking back and forth. Unless when you go out with my mother sometimes. And I remember how I was, one time, especially then coming back from New York, I told my mother, it's New York over here, there's nothing what to be afraid. And I took my bike and I went on my own. It didn't take long. I would say 5 Zlovs came and they threw me off the bike and gave it to me. I remember not to go on myself. But the point I wanted to bring out is, this is the story. We live in an apartment house that happens to be that my mother is still there. And on the top floor, there was a family from Fez. We call them the Fassis. Usually the people of Fez were known as more fundamentalist, a lot of so-called Hamas. So I remember coming back from yeshiva. This is Taf Shalom Adal of 1971. There's a break, 12 to 2. The way it's in Europe, we come home. I come up the steps, and this little kid, this Fassi kid, he's standing on the top floor, and he's aiming his spits on top of me. It was Gishmei Bracha coming down. I go into the house, we're on the second floor, and I tell my mother, because we already knew when this happens, I tell my mother, did anything happen in Israel today? We go, we open the shortwaves, because the local media you can't trust, then. And yes, last night, Israel invaded Beirut, killed the terrorists in their beds. So here is the response, in Morocco. You're coming up the steps and you're getting the rain on top of you. Okay. My father comes home, and my mother tells him what has just happened. He didn't ask any questions. He's running out of the house. And I remember my mother screaming, "Wo lebst du? Where are you going?" He ran upstairs, walked into their house, went into their dining room, and he started to bang on the table. Who started up with my children? You should know I am respected by the king. I am respected by the governor. I will go and report to them what you guys have done.